Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Young of Roto-Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the Geico 500 at Talladega Superspeedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Texas Motor Speedway, Chase Elliott grabbed his first win in more than a calendar year, holding off Brad Keselowski and William Byron on a late restart that featured plenty of restarts. There was a Texas record tying, 16 cautions in the race, which is certainly one of the talking points of the race, Stevie.
Yeah, I mean, good for Chase Elliott. You know, we've been waiting for him to kind of get over the hump of like winning a race. His speed has been a lot better this season. He's been finishing really well. I think it was just a matter of time before Chase Elliott won. Kyle Larson had the most dominant car by far at the beginning of that race. He had randomly had a tire fall off like 20 laps into a run and had a 2-lap penalty and kind of hurt his chances. I think the tire situation on like how old his tires were kind of hurt him more than like anything else. But yeah, I mean, Larson had a dominant car. Denny Hamlin had a really good car. The finish won't show it. But he probably had the best car as far as like being able to pass and moving through the field. So, I mean, if that caution doesn't come out with like, 6 or 7 laps to go, I think Hamlin wins the race over Chase Elliott. But you got to win the race, and that's what Chase Elliott did. Love to see Brad running really well. They were testing some stuff in practice, and it might be good for them that they might have hit on something because he had a lot of speed in the second half of the race. And Nick, it's not shocking that William Byron, again, not the best car, top 5, top 6 car, finishes in the top 3 again. I mean, he's just consistently good.
Yeah, not shocking at all, but one of those races where a couple of the bets we gave out in Running Hot got tanked by an earlier caution when some guys had pitted a little early, and then caution came out, trapped them a lap down. So we had, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. top 10. We had Zane Smith top 10. We had all sorts of, I had a Noah Gragson top Ford bet that all just went crashing down on that very final stint where they all came in the pit when the fuel window opened, and then a caution came out, trapped them all a lap down. I thought Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had a top 5 car. He started 31st and was just passing everybody all day. And he'd lose track position to a slow pit stop or bad strategy, and he passed everybody again. And then unfortunately, just getting trapped down on that final caution that final stint was too much to overcome there. But he was running 6th or 7th with, that final pit stop looming, and he had the freshest tires. And I was very shocked that he came in early when he could have done like Brad Keselowski did or done like Daniel Suarez did and run it long, caught the caution that everybody seemed to know was coming. And he would have been ahead of those guys. He would have been ahead of Keselowski. He would have been ahead of Suarez. He had better cars than them all race. So I had a 150 to 1 Ricky live ticket that I thought was very live until he got trapped a lap down, I think, with bad strategy. So just another shout out there to Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who had a great car, great speed, and it just didn't work out for him at Texas. But we are on to Talladega. We have some super speedway racing. Yes, some drafting racing. We've already had a drafting race, a super speedway race at Daytona earlier this year at the Daytona 500. We had a drafting race at the 1.5 mile track of Atlanta, which I kind of call like a pseudo speedway because it's a drafting race, but it runs a little bit like a 1.5 mile as well, although it was arguably one of the most exciting races in the next gen era. So I do think we could pull in a little bit from there. But racing at Talladega, Stevie, what is that like? I mean, 2.66 mile track, the biggest oval we run in NASCAR.
Yeah, I mean, 2021, I would have answered this question completely different than what I'm going to answer now. The racing at super speedways has changed. It's changed a lot. So it's become like fuel window type races and trying to run up in front of everybody but not lead because you don't want to use the most fuel, short pitting to put less fuel in when everybody else needs to put a full tank of gas in. Like, it's so interesting how Talladega and Daytona have changed into like fuel type races where fuel is like the most talked about thing. So, I mean, it's still the week for underdogs, and it's the week that anybody can win. Like literally anybody can win. So, that is always fun when it comes to betting. But as far as like Dega in general, like the racing here has just changed.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. And one thing I noticed last year at Talladega, right? Talladega is our widest track in addition to our biggest track. And it was really hard to run 3 wide. You only really could if the other 2 lanes were fuel saving. But that third lane just never really came in when the other 2 lanes were pushing. So track position is still going to be extremely important at these races, especially as we get down to the nitty gritty, that final fuel window in stage 3. How is it different though from, right? We already had the Daytona 500 earlier this year, Stevie, but how is Talladega different from Daytona?
I mean, you kind of just nailed it, right? It's just wider in general. So, yes, we have the big one at Talladega just as much as we have the big one at Daytona, and it's a drafting track. So, you're going to have, cars that can move through the field and gain positions that way. But at the end of the day, there is a third lane and even a fourth lane at Talladega where we just don't really have that at Daytona. You can run 3 wide at Daytona, but it's very, very close, and anything can kind of happen. But at Talladega, you can run like 3 wide very comfortably. So one of the things that I just wanted to point out, like we talk about like the fuel savings and all that stuff, and that's all you're going to hear all week. But at Daytona earlier this year, AJ Allmendinger had to come back down pit road. He was a single car on the track running fastest laps when there was a group of 30 cars on the racetrack. You never, ever saw that prior to the next gen era. So the fuel savings, like they took it to the next level at Daytona. And I feel like we're going to see the same thing again this weekend.
Yeah, he was faster than the 30-car pack just running by himself. Literally something we've never seen before. And that's because the whole pack was saving, like massively saving fuel. So, I mean, you kind of alluded to it. We're going to have some funsy bets, some long shots. How do we bet Talladega? Because obviously with the drafting and anybody can win type of a track and a style of racing, it becomes a little bit harder to just be like, okay, well, I like Denny Hamlin, so I'm going to bet him to win, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you gotta look through the data like we always do anyway. But I mean, Blaney, Elliott, Byron, and Hamlin are like your 4 favorites, and those guys, if there's no wrecks, probably have the best probability to win the race. But Nick, there's going to be wrecks. Like we're not going to go to Talladega and have stage cautions be the only cautions that we're going to have. The aggressiveness, the pushing, people potentially running out of fuel, the strategy of fuel. Like there's so many different variances that can happen where the range of outcomes at Talladega and Daytona is just so massive.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that we like long shot bets. It's one of the reasons that we're looking for these like high plus, type of plus money type of bets. So, I mean, I spread out my outrights. I usually bet like 8 to 12 outrights for like 3 or 4 total units. And I'm still like doubling or tripling depending on like who wins if I hit those.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one of those races where anybody can win. I will say, though, at Talladega in the next gen era, it's been a lot of favorites that have won. So, either we're air quote due for a longer shot, something longer than like a Ross Chastain or a Bubba Wallace that have, won in Talladega in the past 2 or 3 years. So either we're due or that's just kind of the trend we have here, excuse me, at Talladega is, just favorites kind of winning. But we don't know until the race is won. We do know, though, like you said, by looking at the data, the probability that some of these longer shot cars end up at the front is still pretty good, right? We see some of them ending up as the top manufacturer in their manufacturer if they're not winning. So I know you and I will be looking at manufacturer bets. And just the way these things, you said the range of outcomes is so wide. That means there's a lot of randomness. So we'll definitely be looking at plus money matchups, plus money, head-to-head type things as well for some of my bets. So it is time to dive into those bets. As always, we're going to take you for a lap around Talladega. That's 4 turns, 1 pick from Stevie, 1 pick from me per turn before we drive into victory lane. So it is time to wave the green flag on the Geico 500 and drive into turn 1. Green flag's out for the Geico 500. Stevie, it looks like you are starting off turn 1 a little interesting. Got some top Ford bets.
Yeah, a little spicy. I actually, and I know you're going to talk about this in your turn 1 pick too. You could really honestly combine all 6 of these picks that we're going to talk about. Yeah. And like if you hit any of them, I think you're still plus 3 units. So I'm going to go to the top Ford bet because I'm finding in my model that if Blaney's not the top Ford this weekend, if he has an issue, it's Talladega. If Blaney has an issue, like top Ford is wide open.
Yep.
So I have Michael McDowell at 16-1. All these are quarter unit bets for me. I'm not putting a full unit on any of these. So all of these are a quarter unit. They'll equal 1 unit. So I have Michael McDowell 16-1, Todd Gillen 17.5-1, Ryan Preece 22.5-1, and Justin Haley 30-1. And just looking at these, obviously we're going to talk about Logano. We're going to talk about Keselowski, Buescher. I bet Buescher outright, so I don't want to include him in my top Ford because if he hits his outright, I'm in a good place anyway. So looking at this, I just need Blaney to kind of have an issue because he's been the dominant car, not just the dominant Ford, but he's been the dominant car at this racetrack. But if we are just looking at Justin Haley, who has an average finish of 13th, Todd Gillen, who has 2 top 10s in the last 10 races at Talladega, who I know both of us like. You're going to talk about Chase Briscoe. Michael McDowell has top 10 upside. He's finished inside the top 10 in 2 of the last 4. So just throwing all these Fords kind of in a bag here and saying, I need one of these 6 guys to beat Ryan Blaney because Logano and Keselowski are so aggressive that like they're either going to win the race or they're going to finish outside the top 20 because they're going to make the pushes. They're going to make the blocks. And that's the best thing about Logano and Keselowski. You know exactly what's going to happen. They're either going to finish inside the top 3 or they're going to finish outside the top 20. So just kind of throwing all these Fords together, you could potentially bet some outrights with these guys, but I think the top Ford bet is a little bit safer as far as like you don't necessarily need them to win the race. So yeah, just not rooting against Ryan Blaney, but saying if something where Blaney like runs out of fuel in the last lap or something, like these
has an issue coming to pit road. There's
so
many things that can go wrong. Getting on pit road at these super speedway races is often tricky because you're coming with a pack of cars and you're trying to get slowed down from 190 miles an hour. There's a lot of things that can go wrong at these tracks. So Stevie with 4 top Ford bets for a quarter unit each. I have 2 more top Ford bets for my part of turn 1, quarter unit each. So Stevie, if we, like you said, you combine all 6 and risk 1.5 units. And if even the lowest one of these, which is 16-1 hits, you're profiting 2.75 units, right? You win 4 units, but you spent 1.5, but you'd get a quarter unit back. So you'd be losing 1.25 units while making 4 units on the worst of these. That's plus 2.75 units. So that's why you can bet 6 of these and still make money. So for my turn 1 pick, my top 2 Fords, or my 2 top Fords, this is a mouthful to say, Chase Briscoe top Ford 16-1 and Noah Gragson top Ford 18-1. And looking at Chase Briscoe, he has run as the top Ford on 10.8% of all super speedway laps since the start of last year. So 5 super speedway races, right? 2 Daytona, 2 Talladega last year, and 1 Daytona this year. That's third only to Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney, those, Team Penske Fords. And it's fourth behind Cindric if we just narrow it to the final 20 laps of each race. And if we expand it to the final 40 laps of each race, which is kind of that final fuel window, that final fuel stint, Briscoe's back in the third behind only Blaney and Logano in terms of percentage of laps run as the top Ford driver. And a lot of that comes, 4 of those 5 races come despite having Eric Almirola and Kevin Harvick to compete against instead of Josh Berry and Noah Gragson. And we know how good Almirola and Harvick were as super speedway drivers. So definitely like Chase Briscoe 16-1. Noah Gragson is a very interesting one. He's been the top of his manufacturer, which last year was Chevy, and then this year has been Ford, on 30% of the laps in the final 40 laps of the 3 super speedway races he ran since the start of last year. 2 races last year, then he was suspended for the final 2 super speedway races, and then 1 race this year at the Daytona 500. So that means over those 3 races, he's been there at the front at the end of races, despite running, for 2 larger car count manufacturers, right? Chevy has in the mid-teens in terms of car count, and same as Ford. So being as the top in your manufacturer in 30% of 120 laps, that's 36 out of 120 laps. So definitely like Noah Gragson as well at 18-1 to give us that turn 1 Ford top manufacturer sprinkle among 6 drivers. So that is turn 1. Real quick, how about your thoughts on Briscoe and Gragson?
I added them, so I just put my quarter unit on both of them as well, because like Josh Berry's inexperience in a cup car on super speedways is kind of what you were talking about as far as like, hey, they're not competing against Amarola. Amarola was a fantastic super speedway racer, and so was Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick was someone that was really good at running inside the top 5, controlling lines and stuff. So I mean, I'm with you. I think we're just kind of fading like Blaney, Logano, Kez, and like we're getting a lot of value. And like my model is showing like the top Ford bet is like one of the most value sensitive things this week as far as just overall betting. So I added these 2 as well. Like, I mean, we hit what, 2.5 units at minimum. So
exactly.
I'm in.
And here's the other thing. You mentioned Kevin Harvick was great at controlling lines, all that. He actually was slightly ahead of Briscoe in terms of, percentage of laps as the top Ford in the final 40 laps. But now you're removing Kevin Harvick from the pool there. So that enhances, like you said, that Ford value. So that is turn 1. We're going to continue and roll the corner here. Let's not really roll in the corner. We're going to bump draft through turn 2. All right, turn to Stevie. This is a guy I talked about kind of at the top of the show. You're going back to an angry, potentially, Ricky Stenhouse Jr.
He wasn't happy with Ty Gibbs, that's for sure.
No, not at all.
That last caution was Stenhouse trying to wreck Ty Gibbs. But anyway, I'm going to go to another quarter unit here and take Ricky Stenhouse at 35-1 over on BetMGM. Absolutely love Stenhouse on super speedways. I mean, don't look at his finish. Don't look at anything stats-wise for Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Just know that when you're betting Ricky Stenhouse Jr., there's a probability of him finishing inside the top 5 or in the 30s. And that's exactly what I'm looking for at super speedway races. You have to be aggressive enough to win the race. And Stenhouse has 3 super speedway races that he's won because he's aggressive. He is aggressive enough to win this race. So I'm throwing all the stats out and I'm just going pure aggressiveness. He has a win at Daytona in the next gen era. Absolutely love Stenhouse here at 35-1 over on BetMGM.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. This is an official bet for me as well. I'm with you on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. quarter unit, 35-1 at BetMGM. 3 career wins all on super speedways. So he's one of those that just kind of defies the statistics or the model, right? He either, just like you said, he either wins or he's back in the 30s or something like that, it seems. But that's what I want. I want a driver who can win. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr., 35-1 is Stevie's pick for turn 2, but I'm in on that as well. My turn 2 pick, I'm going to take Joe Gibbs Racing to have the highest finisher over Hendrick Motorsports at plus 115. And this is a straight up 4v4, right? You got 4 Gibbs cars, you got 4 Hendrick Motorsports cars. And if we look since the start of last year, which of course is since Ty Gibbs joined Joe Gibbs Racing, JGR has led 122 laps compared to 106 for Hendrick Motorsports with the current driver lineup. So, JGR does have a little bit of an advantage here in terms of like running at the front. But overall, as an average running position, Hendrick Motorsports has had a slight advantage. But a lot of that is probably, some Ty Gibbs inexperience from last year, which he obviously has progressed tons, especially in the second half last year and the start of this year. He is a totally, different driver. And so I think that closes the gap a lot between these two teams to where this is basically a coin flip. And honestly, getting Denny Hamlin alone makes this almost worth it. I mean, he is the premier super speedway driver of this era, along with, Logano, Keselowski, and Blaney, I would say, in terms of the past 10 or 15 years or so. So it's one of those spots where it's pretty hard to pass up on Denny Hamlin at plus money. Kyle Larson's good at super speedways, but he hasn't quite gotten the finishes. William Byron and Chase Elliott, of course, get great finishes, and Alex Bowman is fine. He just hasn't quite gotten the finishes. So if we're looking at finishing, I do like the upside that Denny Hamlin provides here for Joe Gibbs Racing in a spot that I think should be pretty much a coin flip.
Yeah, I think this should be a pick 'em, like minus 110 both sides. So getting it at plus money, I mean, I'd definitely show value there. So, Hamlin against these guys, and it's not something we talk about a ton, but like Truex has changed how he races on super speedways. Like he was a guy that loved to run in the middle of the packs, and now like he's moved up and he's trying to run up towards the front with the next gen era, and he has the fourth highest average running position in the 9 super speedways that we've had with the next gen era. So he's changed the way that he's raced on these races, which gives him more upside. Like you said, Ty Gibbs has definitely improved. And I mean, Denny's just one of the best at these super speedway races. But I will say, little nervous when I heard Denny on the podcast say like, hey, this is more of a crapshoot than it used to be. That's never what you want to hear from the confidence of Denny Hamlin, who is very confident when it comes to this racetrack usually.
Yeah, and you mentioned Truex's average running position in the next gen era at the 9 super speedway races. If we go to the start of 2023, so the last 5, and shout out to Jordan Maccabee of Rotoballer for pointing this out, and you can see it in his note tracked in the Action Network app. Truex has the best average running position at Daytona and Talladega since the start of last year. So you definitely mentioned how Truex has kind of changed how he's running these races. It's because he's running up front. So that makes me like this bet even more. So 2 turns down, 2 turns to go. We're going to drive down the backstretch. But before we get into turn 3, all right, we're 2 turns in. We have 2 turns to go. It is time to dive into turn 3. Stevie, what do you have for us here in turn 3 at Talladega?
Yeah, I mean, these bets used to be so much more fun until you gave out $1 million parlay that has ruined top 10 betting for everybody. Thanks, Nick. I'm going to go to Corey LaJoie here for a top 10 plus 225. This is a number I wish was a little bit higher, but I also don't know if we're necessarily going to get it better. So this is one that I think you could wait. I already bet this, but I think this is one that you could wait to see, like, if he qualifies in the 30s, even in the late 20s, like, you might get this at like 275. So I think this is one you could wait. Corey LaJoie, man, he has been fantastic when it comes to avoiding issues and finishing well. And I think that when you're looking at a top 10 bet, finishing races is the most important part of these. Finished 5th last year. If we go to super speedways just in general, he's finished inside the top 10 in 3 straight. So, and he's doing it the opposite way that we talked about, right? Like he's doing it by kind of sitting back, staying out of issues, saving fuel, and really pushing in the last, quarter of the race. So I think this is a spot where we see Corey LaJoie kind of run mid to backpack, potentially try to save some fuel, take less fuel, and try to run up towards the front at the end of the race. And that's a strategy that's worked too. So like there's so many different strategies now at Talladega and Daytona, but it's working for him. He's done well in the last 3. So give me Corey LaJoie here, top 10 plus 225. And again, I think this is one that you could potentially wait until after qualifying, because if he does qualify bad, I think you're going to get a better number.
Yeah, Corey LaJoie qualified on speed 33rd earlier this year for the Daytona 500. So definitely one you could wait on. But of course, if he qualifies better, then this could get shorter as well. For my bet, speaking of qualifying, I am going to take Eric Jones at plus 170 over Chris Buescher in qualifying. Now, I know it sounds a little scary given how bad the Toyotas were in qualifying for the Daytona 500. And, the Fords were pretty good. But Eric Jones was the fastest of the Toyotas in qualifying at the Daytona 500. He qualified on speed 22nd. And Chris Buescher qualified on speed just 15th. And Chris Buescher's teammate, Brad Keselowski, qualified 25th behind Eric Jones at the Daytona 500 in terms of speed. Now, obviously, their starting position is different because then we have the dual races. But if we just look at the single lap qualifying, Erik Jones finished between the RFK Racing teammates here. And then you add in kind of the fact that, the Ford nose, while it was redesigned more with, because the previous iteration of the nose last year had a lot of super speedway emphasis and low drag, low downforce type of nose. And that lost Ford a lot on the mile and a half tracks and some of the shorter tracks. So Ford adjusted that nose in the offseason and actually was supposed to take away from the super speedway program a little bit, but obviously Team Penske and Penske affiliated cars found something. We saw Joey Logano and Michael McDowell, which Front Row Motorsports is now a Penske affiliate, take the front row. We saw Austin Cindric qualify fourth on speed. And then the next Fords were Harrison Burton, which is Wood Brothers Penske affiliate, Todd Gilliland, which is Front Row Penske affiliate. And then the next Fords after that were Stewart Haas, RFK Racing, and Stewart Haas, and RFK, of course, being that Chris Buescher. So it's not like RFK Racing themselves found a ton of speed for qualifying at Daytona. And you do have to think after one super speedway race, maybe Toyota's figure out how to make some gains from the Daytona 500 and gain a little bit on the Fords and the Chevys in qualifying. Plus, we're just getting kind of a big number here. We're getting plus 170 in a matchup where he beat one of the RFK teammates, Erik Jones did, and lost to the other. So I'm going to take Erik Jones plus 170 over Chris Buescher in qualifying.
Yeah, after Daytona too, a lot of the Ford drivers talked about how the car didn't feel as trimmed out with the new body. So I don't mind that. And like Toyota, they've had speed everywhere. So like you said, you're getting a bet. Like anytime you get a plus 170 at Daytona and Talladega for just about anything, you're like interested in it because the range of outcomes is just so wide. So, I mean, Chris Buescher might not get off pit road well enough where he qualifies like 25th. Like, there's just so many little things that have to go right, even in qualifying.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just take a little plus money shot here on something where, it was a 50-50 in terms of the Daytona 500 in terms of RFK drivers versus Erik Jones. So 3 turns down. Stevie, we're going to bump draft a little bit more. Before we get to the checkered flag, though, of course, we're going through turn 4. All right, what do you got for us in turn 4, Stevie?
I'm going to my amigo, man. I love what Daniel Suarez is doing on Super Speedway Racing. So, again, another guy, if you look at it early in his career, was racing completely different than how he's approaching Super Speedway races now. And if we look at Talladega, he wrecked here in the first race with the next-gen car, but he's finished 11th or better in the last 3. So 8th, 9th, and 11th. And that's all I kind of need to see to have a plus 190 over on BetMGM, plus 190 for Daniel Suarez top 10. So, yeah, I mean, again, I'm looking for people that have adjusted to the next-gen era when it comes to super speedway racing because it's just different. Like, you can't run 28th anymore and try to go to the front. You either have to do something different on pit road or you have to run up towards the front. And I think Daniel Suarez is just kind of getting some of that Ross Chastain aggressiveness when it comes to super speedways, and it's really paid off for him. So I'm going to go Suarez top 10 plus 190 over on BetMGM.
My amigo, I like that one. Daniel Suarez, top 10, plus 190, BetMGM. For my turn 4 pick, if you listened to Action Network's daily show, Green.Daily, I gave this out, but it's still there. Anthony Alfredo, top 10 at 14-1. There's still a plus 750 out there. So this is a spot where we still have time to take advantage of this Anthony Alfredo line. If you missed Green.Daily, if you didn't see me track it in the Action Network app, this one hasn't moved. And Anthony Alfredo has run at Talladega twice in the Cup Series. He's finished 10th and 12th. That's an average finish of 11.0. We're getting him 14-1 for a top 10 finish. Now, obviously, that's not going to be his long-term average finish, but it gives you an idea of what he can do. Now, that was in 2021. That was with Front Row Motorsports, but Front Row Motorsports back in 2021 isn't what they are today. They had one top 10 finish at a non-drafting oval back in 2021. Anthony Alfredo finished second to last among all full-time drivers in the season standings. That's how far back that team was 3 years ago, even though Michael McDowell did win the Daytona 500 that year. But that shows you can win these super speedway races, finish inside the top 10 super speedway races with these lower teams. Now Anthony Alfredo is running for Beard Motorsports, and Beard Motorsports has 5 top 10s in 23 super speedway starts. So that's, more than 1 in 5. 14-1 is just crazy too long. 7.5-1 is too long. Even if we take out the Daytona 500, even if we take out the Daytona playoff cutoff races, that still leaves us 14 races where Beard Motorsports has competed in either Talladega or a air quote calmer Daytona summer race. And they finished in the top 10 in 2 of those 14, which is 1 in 7, which would be 6-1 as fair odds, plus 600 is fair odds. So just 14-1, 7.5-1, too long here for Anthony Alfredo top 10.
I think you nailed something when you said Beard Motorsports, right? Like, they consistently bring fast race cars. They have, ECR engines. They work with RCR as far as everything, and they bring really good race cars to these super speedways. So again, he's not running for points, so like he can be a little safer in the first 2 stages of this race where, average running position matters if you are trying to win. We're not trying for Anthony Alfredo to win this race. We want him to be on the racetrack when the checkered flag, kind of waves. So I think he's going to be, pretty safe, and that's what we typically see out of Beard Motorsports cars, and then really try to make a push in that final stage, and that's all you're kind of asking for here at 14-1.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you're asking for. And Anthony Alfredo, he qualified 20th on speed in the Daytona 500. So he has speed to run with the pack, mid-pack even, just, in single car trim. So he's totally fine. He can run with the pack, and it just comes down to if he's in the right spot at the right time at the end of the race. So those are our 4 turns, 4 picks from Stevie, 4 picks from myself. We only have one thing left to do, Stevie, and that is take the victory lane checkered flag for the Geico 500. Where are we going for victory lane?
We're going to go to a manufacturer bet. Again, we talked a little bit about these, and we're going to go to the top Toyota, and I feel like this has turned into an Eric Jones podcast where we talk about Eric Jones every single week, but we're getting him at 9-1 as the top Toyota this weekend, and I'm showing a lot of value on this, like one of the most of anything that I've looked at this weekend. So he's finished inside the top 10 in 3 of the last 4. We talk about Eric Jones and how good he is on super speedways, and that really hasn't changed. It doesn't matter when he's been a Toyota, a Chevy, a back marker team. It really just hasn't mattered. Like, Eric Jones finds a way to the front of these races, and again, that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for a guy that has the upside to run up front. I think his biggest competition as far as like top Toyota is Hamlin and Bubba, and those guys are like 3 and 4-1. So like, I have Jones as like the 4th best Toyota, and we're getting him at 9-1, and Toyota is very limited in the field. It's not like they even have a bunch of like added cars this weekend like we see sometimes at Daytona. So yeah, absolutely love this spot when you're looking at Toyota in general. And I think Eric Jones has a lot of upside.
Yeah, I agree with you. I love Eric Jones at super speedways in general. I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before at super speedway races in, last year and earlier this year for Daytona. Eric Jones just always runs at the front at super speedway races in the next gen car. And even before then, even before the next gen car, he won at Daytona, right, with Joe Gibbs Racing. So he just gets it done at these tracks. And if we look at the Daytona 500, right, there were 9 Toyotas in the field for that race because we had Jimmy Johnson in that one as well. And we just narrow it down to that final fuel window again, the final 40 laps or so. Eric Jones ran as the top Toyota on track in 20% of the final 40 laps, 8 out of the 40 laps. That is, pretty crazy. That's like 1 in 5. So plus 400 would be fair if that were the case. Now, obviously, it's not quite the case, but we're at 9-1 here or 8-1 at some places. That's still too long. I mean, this is a spot where he's at least the average Toyota, and there'll be 8 Toyotas in the field. So, he should be 7-1 or shorter, in my opinion, and by my modeling, Eric Jones should be, at least that. So definitely with you here, 9-1, too long, 8-1, too long on Eric Jones. So we're going to take him as the top Toyota finisher for our victory lane pick. But that is going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Geico 500 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. We'll be back this time next week as we talk bets for the Worth 400 at Dover Motor Speedway. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.